The United States of America. Unity and oneness is what we're made of. One nation under God, it's plain to see. We're showing the whole world what a country should be. United we stand in America, hand in hand in America. Together as one in a land that we love. United we stand in America.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Welcome to Changing Times. Lynn Morris couldn't be here today. Neither could Dr. Mary. They had some obligations that needed to be taken care of. Lynn, of course, is working on getting much healthier and stronger and learning how to navigate and be more mobile after the operation where he had to lose that portion of his leg. And they had asked me to share an episode that we had recorded last week, but I had an issue with the recording, and I did have this interview that Dr. Mary did over at First and Calvary Presbyterian Church a while back as she was working on kind of transitioning more into working more in the community, maybe less of a footprint at the church, and just kind of sharing why she was doing that. I was trying to get it all ready for Veterans Day and that, and just have a lot of issues with whether it's equipment or vehicles or lots of different things happening. But I thought this is a perfect opportunity to be able to share this, for you to be able to hear her heart as she talks about why she does what she does. The audio was a little off. That's my fault. But I think I got it cleaned up good to where everyone, you'll be able to enjoy this. So without further ado.
Let me just set this up. I'm here with Mary Byrne, and Mary has graciously volunteered for years to handle our Veterans Day celebration. How many years has it been?
3 years as chair of the Community Life Committee. You have a 3-year opportunity. Whether you're assigned to that community every year is up to the pastor at this point. But yeah, I got the assignment for 3 years.
You seem to have taken to that quite well as well.
I was raised in a restaurant management household. That's what my mother's degree was in. That's what my grandfather on both sides of the family did, restaurant management. And so cooking for big numbers, or at least planning and purchasing for big numbers, was something I knew how to do easily. And I'm the oldest of 6. Big numbers was always in my life. And the whole idea of creating an environment for celebration was a big part of my Irish heritage. So yeah, it came easy for me.
And we were just speaking also about what the motivation is for you, and you were speaking about the fact that the military was a part of your husband's life, and that has been a strong motivation for you to work on the veterans.
Yeah, my husband was an Army brat. His father was a chaplain in the Army in World War II, and in fact, his military pension was higher than the pension from his church when he finally retired. So there was a lot of pluses for his family, but there were also sacrifices, and I think that's what I am motivated to honor, was the sacrifices not just of the soldiers but of the entire family. And those luncheons for veterans in November, to me, were an opportunity to keep the embers burning, because so much of our culture forgets. And I think particularly our Christian culture forgets that there is a relationship between the freedom we enjoy as Christians, the government that respects and is mandated to protect that freedom, and the military that protects that government. And the other side of that is our civil responsibility to vote for the people who are going to command that military honestly and with integrity. So this relationship, in my observation, has fallen apart. And I think that a great deal of that is due to misinformation about what the statement, separation of church and state, means. It means the government will not have an official religion. It doesn't mean that the church separates itself from its responsibility to nurture people who will serve in government or in the military. It doesn't mean that. And in fact, we have to pray for that regularly. We have to nurture our children to come up thinking that Jesus was not just the baby in the manger. Jesus was not just the man who hung on the cross for personal salvation. If you read the book of Revelation, Jesus is the commander of the army of heaven. And he is fearsome. He will come back to judge his enemies. And we better understand that God had an enemy, starting with the book of Genesis, and that Christians will have an enemy trying to enslave them and suppress their freedom to worship God. That's what the entire book of Exodus is about. Tell Pharaoh to let my people go so they can serve me. In other words, Pharaoh, you're working for the enemy of my people. And you are suppressing their ability to worship me freely. Freedom doesn't mean licentiousness. Freedom means the freedom to serve God. And if you look at communist countries, they don't have it. And we have communist enemies infiltrating in our government, in our school systems. Trust me, I've studied the Marxism. If we allow our children to forget the principles of freedom, the biblical principles of freedom, and that liberty was God's idea, and it was liberty so you would have free will to worship him, and that his setting up of the government of Israel was to create a nation that would have people dedicated to service of him. If you forget that, you forget to teach it, you forget to honor it, you forget that America is part of that legacy, then we're cooked. And it's the responsibility of the church to not just honor the memory, but to nurture it, to keep the fire burning. And right now I think we're at the ember stage.
All right. What would you say to parents or just parishioners in general who say, well, the military is a symbol of violence. They glamorize the use of weapons, and that's not the direction that I think a church should go in.
That again was the surrender of their responsibility to understand the privilege of voting for the people who would be the commander-in-chief of the military. Because, yes, there is a military-industrial complex. There's been, you might say, a co-opting of our resources, not just of our financial resources as a country, but also of our people, to use the military for dishonorable intentions. That's true. But that's also our responsibility to correct. And if we don't understand that churches have a responsibility to ensure that Christians vote, and that they vote for good people to be in command of the military, then it will be abused. And what you're seeing is the outcome.
I heard once someone say that no one loves peace more than a soldier and his family.
Yeah, I just saw the documentary that war is failure of diplomacy. Yes, you need to be ready for assaults from your enemy, but war is the result of our politicians failing to do their part in averting war. And sometimes you can't. That is the story of the American Revolution. They took 10 years to try to avert war. They went and pleaded in Parliament. They pleaded with the king 10 years. And when it finally came down to not just being ignored, but having your houses become military quarters, having your guns confiscated so you couldn't defend yourself when they were commandeering your homes, raping your daughters. When that happened, they knew there was no alternative than to shoot. And it was farmers. It was farmers with muskets. You know, it was not a well-organized army. But they knew. And it was called the Presbyterian Revolution because the Presbyterian pastors in the pulpit were reminding people of what their rights were for liberty, particularly in the Old Testament. So there is, again, there's dependence in the church's legacy of teaching people about freedom and the military's legacy in doing their work to protect it. But once you separate them, you have unmoored the moral foundation of a military with guns, and you have unmoored the church from its responsibility to be salt and light in the culture. That's what's happened.
I know that the National Guard, they started it, and they call themselves the Army of Citizen Soldiers. Which sort of implies that there has to be a place where people can learn to prepare their children, not, with the hope of never needing it, but at least knowing that if we have a standing army, that then we can always negotiate from a position of strength. So how would you present that to a group of people who may not be certain that that's something the church should talk about?
I'll give you the story of my husband's experience in the National Guard. So what he was taught was the organization of what the military is like, because the National Guard is you might say the Little League, the Farmers League, of how to discipline yourself, take orders, understand teamwork, that sort of thing. So when there was a breaking, I believe it was the breaking of a dike, but I know there was a flood involved. As many times as I heard the story, you'd think I remember the details. Anyhow, it was the National Guard called out to sandbag against the water so that they could protect certain areas of town. And they were driving the huge trucks that can tolerate flooding. And Tom brought all the boys home to his mother's house for something to eat. I remember that. And Mother Ann had to bring out a ham and feed all the boys. So there was an opportunity to learn how to work in a crisis situation without being life-threatening. And you go from that into the military. I think the Boy Scouts offer something similar. They offer this opportunity to learn service, organization, achievement, and badges and patches and that sort of thing. So that National Guard has that opportunity to serve in civilian life. But at the same time, again, I think that there was a problem with the politicians who had command over the National Guard, that we saw some of our National Guard over in foreign lands.
It continues today.
And it continues today. That's not the intent. It's not the intent. So, just like Mike Flynn said, we've got a breakdown in our political system. There was a reason the founders put civilians as commander-in-chief of the military. It's so you couldn't have a tyrannical military. At the same time, when you have commanders-in-chiefs who are civilians who have never been in the military, they don't understand the culture. They know the power, but not the discipline. then you're set up for abuse. And again, we're looking at that. We're looking at it because so many of our people have avoided participating in the preparation for defending our civil society, that they don't appreciate. They're not going to appreciate what they have until it's gone, and that's too late.
With the luncheons that you have organized, what is your main goal in holding it? Is it to educate the congregation about the sacrifices? Is it to reach out to other veterans? Or is it all of those things?
I think it's all of it. I take every opportunity that I see is available on that day. So again, there's been a breakdown, I think, of appreciation in our culture for veterans. So in the last year when I, you might say, hosted the luncheon, I got a video that Jamie Swope wanted to be sure was also shared with the congregation during the service. That hadn't happened before because I hadn't found those videos before. But my goal is not just to honor the memory of the sacrifice of the deceased, but to honor the sacrifice of our present congregation members. It's not open to all congregation members. It's open to the veterans and their families. Because there has to be an acknowledgement, I think, of the church in a ministry to people who may have suffered invisible side effects from seeing violence, from seeing what negative things humans can do to each other. You want to rise above that. You don't want to have to use force, but when they do, it leaves a mark on you. When men are seeking to understand a purpose for all of that, churches have to minister to those people and their families, because it can't be a senseless sacrifice. But the churches have to understand what the damage might be in order to minister to it well. That luncheon for me was an opportunity to serve, to give beauty and meaning, saying they're appreciated, not just by their families, not just by the committee that set up the luncheon, not just by this congregation, but they are part of an ongoing history from the beginning of this country until Jesus comes back. They are part of a history that says the purpose of that period of time in your life was to preserve liberty for people to serve God freely, and if it cost you something that we can't see now, tell us so we can address your needs. So the men and women who were there at the luncheon themselves didn't have physical disabilities, but I made sure they knew one, Gold Star moms, so that if they wanted to reach out to families that were suffering because they lost children in service, it was a way to connect with people in their community. Made sure that they knew about suicide prevention by giving them handouts of services that were available to veterans in the area. I just recently learned about Warrior's Journey, which is a ministry basically set up. Scott McChrystal, chaplain, Scott McChrystal is a retired Army chaplain, who wants an ongoing program available that veterans can plug into, come and go as they need. But our church has to know about those programs so we can tell people, maybe we're not ministering to them directly, but we know how to plug them in to services in the community that can. So that's my goal, is to communicate what's available, to love on them, to have a good time, celebrate them and celebrate that time in their lives. and hopefully send the word out to other people in the military that says this is a welcoming church for your service. You're welcome to come here.
One of the things that really impressed me about the Veterans Luncheon was the missing man play setting. And it kind of struck me as, although patriotism is wonderful and they're all enjoying that during the luncheon, it was introducing the reality.
A reverence for sacrifice.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. And I think that sometimes it's hard in this culture to face the hard facts of that freedom is purchased at a price.
It is.
So
Yeah, and there has been an ongoing analogy between the soldier who's willing to make that sacrifice for somebody else's freedom and Jesus. And so again, when we divide the church from the human institutions meant to protect that freedom, we do a disservice because we undermine the support for those people, and we also undermine the church's appreciation for what its responsibilities are to the culture at large.
what would you like to see First and Calvary do to reach out to veterans and to support that group?
I think it's part of mission outreach. I think we do a good job here on the campus, but I think just the way we have personnel that touches base with college ministries and makes a network, we need another person like that to do that for veterans. Part of my effort to do that is to be a co-host on a show called Changing Times with an entirely separate organization called Acts Ministries, which is non-denominational. The only binding thread is that we are deeply rooted in the Scripture. So whatever denomination you are, if you're deeply rooted in the Scripture, then you're welcome. And we understand that it's about listening to the Spirit of God's call to move and serve. So my efforts there are to bring veterans in, to talk about, again, program availability, veterans' needs, and to amplify that voice so that others in the public hopefully will be moved, in their spirits for finding some way to give back, to serve them as well.
One of the reasons that we set up this interview with you is that we're trying to understand, to highlight those people who have been volunteers and do it so willingly, enabling. What speaks to you that makes you want to volunteer at First and Calvary?
Volunteer at First and Calvary are the children. My whole career has been in teaching. My whole reason for getting involved in government is because I know what happened in the schools. I studied the history of the infiltration into the content of what was taught to them. I was a teacher of children with disabilities. I learned from parents what it meant to advocate for children. My parents had 6 kids. Yes, we were a lot of work, but we never had to do the work that parents of children with disabilities do. And so what I learned there was a self-sacrifice. And I learned that parents need a lot of support in that. So I was the support system for the parents who were supporting their children. I think that there's a lack of understanding of congregations that everybody's a deacon. Everybody is a deacon. You have a deacon board in this church, but they're just the leadership of everybody who's a deacon. So that means everybody is up for service somehow in volunteering for some aspect of this church because you are a member of the army under the command of Jesus. There's the church militant, right? Going out there and changing the culture to gain back territory for God. And there's the ministry of healing. We seem to concentrate on the ones that are safe. We don't give enough reflection and investment into the high-risk areas, which is going out there and taking on the evil. A lot of people think that if you just roll over and be nice, that people will treat you nice. That's not true. Evil is power. Power is ruthless. And power wants to control. So I can't let them have control of the next generation. I just can't. That means I have relinquished the next generation's freedom. I got it from people who fought for me, or at least were willing to do that. And I have a responsibility, even though I don't wear a military uniform, I have a responsibility as a Christian in Christ's army to fight for the freedom of his next generation. So that's why I do what I do.
Absolutely. Do you want to take a moment to tell us about some of the things you have displayed here?
Sure. This was a scrapbook I put together of my father-in-law's pictures because I wanted to organize one of the most impressive periods in my husband's life, even though he was not active in creating that. He was basically a recipient of what his parents' decisions were. So when his father was in Alaska as an Army chaplain, it impacted him so that he got a sense of commitment and patriotism, not just a nationalism, a thoughtless commitment to an identity that was going to be a dominating force over the world. It was a commitment to the principles of freedom that allowed his father to worship a God in a country that was founded on biblical principles. So it all connects. So Tom, this is his picture when he was still just graduated from boot camp. And he has the Army issue glasses and the uniform. He's very serious there. But he did get a Medal of Commendation. And what's interesting is the commendation was because he wrote a manual. He was a logistics guy. He wrote a manual for his office, and it hadn't been done before. Well, again, he came out of the military and then went into business administration. You know, it was he recognized his gift, he used it within the military, and then that helped direct him into what he wanted to do. His father, of course, wanted him to go into the ministry, and he said, "No, thank you." But he always had an appreciation and reverence for the ministry and for the military, obviously. This is my father. He went into the military after high school and was assigned to a psychiatric unit. So he never actually had to shoot, but he was with the men who did have psychological problems from World War II. And he learned then that what they were doing in administering treatment and in learning the purpose and the theories behind those treatments were appealing to him. They were psychology backgrounds, so he eventually went into business administration and focused on personnel development. And then that's Tom. Again, these pictures are very similar. He's getting a letter of commendation from his graduation from boot camp. But he had already had 2 years of service in the National Guard, so he reveled in this. He loved organization. He loved the idea of protecting. He was a good protector. He was a good provider. And I think that's something I appreciated about him. And the military teaches you that your buddy's life depends on you. You must be reliable. And there was probably no one I'd known except my dad who was as reliable as my husband.
It's quite a compliment.
Yeah.
Well, Mary, I can't think of anything specifically to ask you other than, is this something that you think you'll continue doing, or is it time to pass the baton? Or
As I've left the Deacons Board now, that's Tracy Brown. So I created a binder for all of the activities I did, including the Veterans Luncheon. And I left artifacts of all of the things that I had on the tables and so on. So she's in a good place to know. But part of, I think, service is knowing when that period is over, when it's time to pass on the baton. That's how you build legacy. That's how you continue a church. So Tracy knows where to find me, but I have no desire to interfere in her leadership. Yeah.
well, I want to, through you, to thank your family for their service.
Thank you.
And I want to thank you for your service to the church. Because I'm a military person, the Veterans Luncheon is very important to me. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
But that's some of the most powerful parts of all of our story, right? Where it's like what you're doing now, everything that's happening, it's about the Lord, it's about all of that. And He's part of you. So there's that. I mean, I love it.
Yeah.
But it is important for people to know.
This isn't just a romantic attachment to a particular community. Last night, I heard one of the choir members pick up the hymnal and see the national anthem and say, is this right? What about separation of church and state? And I'm like, no, you don't get it, do you? You don't have a country unless you have a military. And you won't have freedom of religion unless you have a country that respects that.
That's right. That's right.
And so what's gone on in the last 2 generations, I think, is the discrediting of the military, probably for Vietnam, but that wasn't the soldiers, that was the politicians.
Right.
And a deliberate movement of the leftists to discredit the reputation so that it became unfashionable. Not only was my husband in the Army and his dad, but his brother as well. It was an expectation. You grow up, you finish high school, you go to the military, then you go to college. And for Tom, that was an opportunity to develop as an individual, not just to get command of other men, but to get command of himself.
Exactly.
So he had the discipline to finish school.
Yeah. I have 2 sons. One is in the military, and one is trying to get into the military. Mm-hmm. And if you would ask my younger son, why are you doing that? He would say, just to know that I can. And it is a challenge to enter an organization where there's a lot of honor and a lot of physical skill required. And so it's something a lot of people aspire to.
Mm-hmm. And for my dad was first generation college attendee. He had good parents, but their education stopped at 3rd grade. They had no ability to give him guidance on what you do when you get to college. But because he was assigned to the psychiatric unit, in the Army, he understood that what he really loved was personnel, and ended up going into business administration and human resources. So it was, not a direct connection to what he did in the Army, but it gave him the guidance to say, that's where I belong in dealing with people. And my connection to that was, he actually wrote the human resource manuals for the company, and he did the personnel development. So he was a teacher in the business environment. And that was part of my career choice, was to be a teacher.
And if you talk to hiring managers, they'll say they gravitate towards ex-military because they understand those people know how to take orders. Those people know how to work as a team.
Yeah.
They're strategic thinkers and they're organized.
The military works the kinks out.
Yes.
By the time they go into the business world, we've got some polished product here. But I hate to refer to people as product. In fact, I'm against that. But you know what I mean. They actually do the work that the K-12 system did not do, and that business community doesn't want to do. They're expecting them to come in as people ready to take responsibility, and the Army teaches you how to do that. Military, I should say, because it doesn't matter what branch. The military said, this is how our culture operates.
Well, I was glad I was able to share that with everybody. It was such an honor to be able to be there as Dr. Mary was sharing there with Robin, just kind of her heart, the reason she's doing what she's doing. And, she's able to interview, and Lynn's able to interview other individuals that are difference makers, but then they don't get interviewed so much. So it was neat to be able to have that and be able to share it. My apologies for some of the sound issues and stuff. Part of that is me learning to get used to using equipment. Also, we've had issues with the equipment getting older and wearing down, and I get distracted real easy, my ADD and stuff. So definitely have some needs for volunteers and individuals to help with editing videos. She has some wonderful artifacts there that I also want to go over with her individually. I took photos of them, and I was going to work it in with the interview, but I thought, man, we just need to sit down with individuals like that, leaders, elders in the community, elders in their church, making a difference and not being satisfied with the status quo, not being satisfied with just leaving things the way they are, realizing that there's change needed and being that change, and then encouraging others. So what an honor to work with such great men and women like Lynn Morris and Dr. Mary Byrne, and just all the difference makers they bring on. It's just incredible. Looking forward to more shows, Changing Times next week. Same time, same channel. Your fearless host will be back, and we will see you again then.